and right now we're gonna have Nataliya Melnyk from Ukraine. Nataliya, she is a director of Ukrainian think tank Bendukidze Free Market Center. She is a political scientist and economic literacy promoter. So welcome, Nataliya.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Nataliya. You have a very interesting topic that you decided to talk about it, and we are waiting to hear everything you have to say about human rights and Ukraine.
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be with you virtually. The new reality of 2020, well, not so new anymore. And when I first was invited to speak at a conference like this, and when I was trying to come up with a specific topic for the conference, I found myself kind of stuck on the issue of deficiencies of the political process that have been highlighted by the response to the pandemic worldwide. And not just that, but the high cost of these deficiencies and how we end up having to deal with them. And just think about this. If you make a questionable decision in your, let's say, personal everyday life, it's most likely that you will be the one paying the cost for this questionable decision. You or your close family or acquaintances, but in most cases it really is you. But when we move this questionable decision on a political level, so we end up having millions and millions of people who have to shoulder the burden and deal with the consequences, especially the unintended ones. The unintended consequences that end up being disregarded and not considered when coming up with a major plan, like, for example, how to deal with a worldwide pandemic. So, first of all, what do we have in Ukraine? Just for short background information. So, we went into severe lockdown mid-March, and with the usual package deal, if I can say so. So with border closings, masks, social distancing, to shutting down of the public transportation, schools, daycare, universities, etc. So in my speech, I would actually have to concentrate on the latter part. The part that has really, really heavy consequences in different areas of life. And these last ones will show us the way I am trying to analyze the impact of lockdown in Ukraine. Because when we usually try to evaluate, we look at a certain set of numbers. So, for example, the number of confirmed cases of coronavirus in the country, then the tendency of filling up hospitals, so the pressure on the healthcare system, then number of deaths, and then we move on to economic growth, GDP, well, namely the decrease in GDP and unemployment rates. So then we try to kind of compare these numbers. Some of them go into the benefit part and the others go into the cost part, right? Because we are making all of these economic sacrifices to save lives. But since the lockdown was introduced in Ukraine, because technically we're still in lockdown, it's just it started easing up end of May. So since it started, we went up from a couple of hundred cases a day to over 4,000 cases right now. So these are confirmed cases. And it is still nowhere close to showing us the real number because, you know, you can't just introduce lockdown and then hope that coronavirus for instance, goes away on its own, right? Usually you have lockdown followed up with testing, and then contact tracing, and then we move on from that. But in Ukraine, we have a very limited testing going on. And if we count it all, we will see that we have about 56 tests for 1 million people, which is extremely low. So 4,000 a day isn't really saying anything at all. Then for the first 2 months of this lockdown, we ended up having people basically confined to their homes, right, or accommodations, and which just dragged out the so-called first wave of coronavirus. So why do I say confined? Because since the public transportation was shut down, they basically had very limited capacity to move around. Not just abroad, but around Ukraine and even in their own cities and towns, because they still rely mostly on public transportation, not on individual cars. So limited movement, and because of that, inability to get to work, right? Because not everyone was able to start working from home the next day after the lockdown was introduced. So fortunately, some of these restrictions were eased up in June, but at the same time, the damage has already been done. And since coronavirus didn't just disappear after the first 2 months of lockdown, we still didn't get any better prepared for it. Even if we just imagine a situation in which we agree to give up some of our rights and needs, because it's not just about rights anymore, in order to, let's say, have our hospitals, doctors better prepared, or, for example, give a chance to our Ministry of Education to prepare schools and universities to better handle the situation with their students, to avoid having the situation with the confirmed cases go worse. But it didn't happen, so you just ended up having people confined to their homes for at least 2 months. And then since they started letting down these restrictions, we are still in lockdown, and we ended up having established so-called COVID-19 relief fund that was meant to help everyone involved deal with coronavirus in the country. But unsurprisingly, it's almost empty now, and none of it went to actually help with the healthcare system capacity, but ended up being spent on road renovation and bonuses for law enforcement. So not even a single lung ventilator was purchased using the funds. So now we are basically continuing the countdown, right? So we're in the 8 months of our lockdown, and still not in any way better prepared for dealing with coronavirus. Almost run out of money to deal with it. And obviously, these are not the only consequences. So what are the numbers telling us? That more than 10% of economically active people in Ukraine lost their jobs because of lockdown. But this number is nowhere near to showing us the genuine situation, because it doesn't reflect, obviously, the hidden unemployment, which in Ukraine we do have a high level of, because most employee-employer relationships in the country are built on, this unofficial understanding that obviously people do not want to lose their jobs, so they're ready to agree to some steps which in reality are leaving them without a job. For example, it's an unpaid leave, right? So if their employer offers it to us, and if you have a choice between an unpaid leave and getting fired, you obviously choose unpaid leave. but you're not making any money, right? You're just sitting at home and hoping that tomorrow you get back to work, but it doesn't work like that. So also, well, it has influence on the amount of work hours people work. So they're losing their part of their income, at least, in bonuses and extra payments and things like that. And everything is obviously connected to the decrease in the economic activity in the country as a whole. And we also see that there's at least a 30% decrease in available vacancies, and which is just increasing the difference between job demand and job supply. So job demand is extremely high right now, and it's not only because the unemployment level is going up, but here once again we're talking about unintended consequences. When it was announced that the borders were closing, obviously a lot of Ukrainians who lived and worked abroad made the decision to come back because they didn't know what was going to happen in the future, right? Neither in their new adoptive country, nor in Ukraine. So they came back, meaning they started looking for jobs in Ukraine. And so this increased the job demand, and we need more jobs. There are jobs available, it's true, but also one of the unintended consequences, because of such a high job demand, we end up having and seeing that employers are increasing their demands towards potential candidates, right? Because they have a more varied choice available right now. And also, another thing which is important to understand about Ukraine, throughout these years, one of the important factors that had stabilized our economy is Ukrainians working abroad and transferring their earnings back home to support their families. And that's why we even joke that Ukrainians working abroad are basically the main investor into Ukraine. Because in 2018, for example, we received about $18 billion of those money transfers from Ukrainians working abroad. And it's a lot more than direct foreign investment that we've been getting. So now, obviously, these numbers are going down, not only because the incomes level are going down in other countries, but because we have a lot of these Ukrainians coming back home, ending up being unemployed. And then, already in May, the media were reporting that about 1/3 of small businesses were saying that they lost about 50% of their income. And in the summer, we saw numbers that said that about 70% of businesses were able or were ready to go back to work with the easing of lockdown restrictions. Obviously, not very many of them would be able to go back to the same scale of activity as before. So even though that we can see that, yes, these businesses are working, but nowhere close to where they were previously. And obviously, other than these limited options for employment for people, that's not the only consequence of lockdown in the country. So if we look at different social surveys that try to determine the level of anxiety in the country, stemming from two major factors. So first factor is obviously anxiety connected to either having you or one of your family members catch coronavirus, and the other factor is financial insecurity. So basically in April, we saw 47% worried about getting coronavirus and 44% worried about their financial insecurity. Then in May, The scales tipped towards financial insecurity because we had already been in 2 months of severe lockdown. A lot of people just ended up losing all of their savings. So it was 38 versus 52. And then in September, the difference was even higher. It was 28 versus 58. In October, it stabilized a little bit, so it was almost even. But this question of financial insecurity and the high level of anxiety, these are the things that we should be worried about and we should be talking about. Because in April, which was a month after lockdown was introduced, already 90% of respondents said that their financial situation has decreased because of the lockdown. And then 45% said that they had no savings left after just 1 month. And then 30% of those who did have some savings left, they were saying that what they have is enough for probably just 1 more month. Not surprisingly, that when we talk about lockdown and the stress of worrying about coronavirus, the stress of worrying whether you will have a job or will get your job back, and things connected with that, we have some really troubling developments in the country. For example, increase in domestic violence. Organizations who deal with this extremely serious issues, they started reporting that within the first month of lockdown, the number of calls that their hotline received doubled. And we understand very well that not many people and not all people report these cases. So even this, in the doubling of the number, is extremely worrying. And the problem is that due to the lockdown, police response to domestic violence was extremely low, right? Because people were just advised to stay at home, right? And in a lot of cases, police officers assigned to these cases said that, well, we wouldn't be able to come to you because people are advised to stay home and avoid unnecessary interactions. And then in Ukraine, at least, we had this rule that in case of domestic violence, you were allowed to basically kick out the abuser from your shared home for 10 days after the incident was reported to the police. So during the lockdown, this rule was scrapped because everyone needed to stay at home. So we had cases in which people, including kids, were just stuck in situations in which they could not leave their abuser. And then we see that the whole lockdown situation is increasingly impacting the inequality in Ukrainian society. So what do I mean by this? So in cases in which you're the lucky one and you don't have to deal with a case of domestic violence in your home, then we have a difference between people who have the opportunity to work from home, which is great for them, and those people who don't have this opportunity because their job does not allow it, right? And then if we go back to the lucky people who can work from home, there is inequality there too, because it's much easier to do it for those who have a comfortable home and who don't have to take care of small kids. Because, like I pointed out, because of the lockdown, we had schools, daycare, and universities shut down, right? So we have a situation in which a parent is trying to keep the job by working from home, but at the very same time, while having to be efficient with work tasks, this person needs to take care of the kids. And the issue becomes more urgent if the smaller the kids are, right? And in case of lockdown, even those people who could technically afford hiring outside help, they couldn't do it because people just preferred to self-isolate. That's one issue. The other one would be that a typical working parent in Ukraine would rely on their parents for help with the children, so involving grandparents in the situation. But as you well know, older people are considered high-risk group, so they were advised to stay away from their children and grandchildren, who tend to be more socially active anyways, and move around more. So also here we see the situation in which grandparents were not able to help out. As a result, we see that parents of minor children that started working from home when the quarantine started and continued working from home, they were saying that only 59% of those people considered themselves as being efficient in their work, compared to 59% of people who did not have to take care of small children. And then 44% of respondents with children said that they lost some part of their income, compared to just 34% of those without children. And 18% with children reported that they lost all income altogether. So they just ended up not being able to work from home and caring about their children. We can imagine that this problem is getting more severe when we talk about single parents, because then they have no one to rely on, both with income and childcare. So that's another consequence, which has impact on the society as a whole. It's a social problem. And then one more thing that we should not forget when we are talking about lockdowns is the impact it has on education, or basically the right of kids to have some kind of education, be it daycare, school, or university. So I don't know about other countries, but in Ukraine, we still are not prepared, even though we're talking about the second year of education under coronavirus. We are still not prepared to completely shift online. Very few schools have teacher capacity and technical capacity to do that. The same situation is with households. We can say that everyone has access to the internet, to the necessary technology. And so what do we end up with if we cannot switch online, if we have schools and various other educational establishments closed down, and we still have that going on, depending on the region and depending on the situation in the region. We are basically talking about the second year of losing valuable time that could have been used, to educate the next generation in the country. So it's easier for those who can, once again, afford private education in Ukraine, which tends to be extremely costly. And most kids just go to ordinary public schools, and it really depends on every separate school, and not only a separate school, but headmaster or even a teacher, the way they decide to proceed when it comes to trying to at least do something for those kids. So this is lost time, lost opportunity, and this is going to definitely have impact on the society in the future. This is not something that we can see right now, obviously, but we will definitely feel it later. And basically the main conclusion of everything that I was trying to talk about today is that tunnel vision is dangerous. This is not just short-term planning, because in our case, in the situation in Ukraine, I can't even say that it's planning the introduction, I mean, of lockdown or any restrictions on, economic and personal lives connected with coronavirus. No, this is not planning. This is obvious tunnel vision. This is a panic, reaction to something extremely serious. We can all agree to that, but it doesn't mean that though the issue, the major, right, underlying issue is big, it doesn't mean that we can ignore all the other issues stemming out of it and being caused by our reaction to the initial big issue. Because why is this, tunnel vision dangerous? It's dangerous because it influences the livelihood and the well-being of every single person in the country. And that's even without mentioning healthcare issues that are being reported by other countries, that basically other diseases are, treated as if they're non-existent, because right now we're dealing with coronavirus. That's why we're ignoring everything else. So I'm really hoping that lessons will be learned from this situation, because we can't just hope that this is, the first and the last time of something similar like this. And I really urge people to not be afraid to question the way their governments are handling things. Even though when, people like us started doing this at first, we had to face our critics that were saying, well, does this mean that you don't care that people are dying from coronavirus? Of course, we do care about people dying from coronavirus, and we want people to be protected, but we also want to respect people's rights to have a decent life, to have a chance to learn, to have a chance to work, and to have a chance to earn money for themselves and for their families. So basically, this is what I wanted to deliver today.
Thank you very much, Nataliya. I listened to you very carefully, and to my surprise, I thought you were talking about Romania, not Ukraine, because we have the similar situation. Every point that you made about Ukraine, we have the same exactly thing in Romania. We have 2 more minutes before we end this intervention, and I have a question for you, because it's most regarding the human rights. I'm telling you how we feel in Romania, because we have the same kind of situation. Maybe it's the same thing in Ukraine. In the name of defending the supreme individual right, the right of life, with all these regulation and laws that the government told us to listen and to use them. The people did not understand that to protect that supreme individual right, you have the right to have the freedom for the derivate rights, the right for the movements and everything that you said. And for a short period of time, I saw people understood to give the temporary power to the government for their rights. But my concern is about the consequences for lockdown. Is as you know, a new habit started in 1 month or 2 months, and already this pandemic, it's more than 6 months. My concern is it's not going to be a new habit for the people. We're not gonna get, used with this situation to give the government the power for our rights in the name of our life.
Well, I think this already is a habit. It's just we saw the signs of this habit in different various situations before the lockdown and before the pandemic, because we can clearly see that when the government is trying to protect rights, let's say, of one group, it is inadvertently influencing the rights of other groups, right? Or when they're trying to protect one right, they're completely disregarding other rights. So this is not something new. And in this situation, I feel that the way we should be acting and the way we should be reacting to this situation, we should be trying to influence both the society and the government, and in a way to explain that people have the right to choose, right? And we should trust the people more than we decide to rely on the government. Those people who are really terrified, afraid of coronavirus, who want to stay at home, who want to continuously socially isolate in their homes, basically stay confined and work from home, they have a right to do so, right? Not a problem at all. But other people who choose that they want to go to work, that they want to have some kind of social interaction, especially if this means that they have a chance to escape a domestic violence situation in their home, they have a right to do so too, right? We should take that into account as well. And I feel that if we rely more on this trust towards other people's ability to make these choices for themselves, we will have fewer cases of these troubling things turning into a habit and into something that we really just learn to live with, right? Because that's just happening so often. So that would be my response to this.